The Boston Celtics. Lots of turnover, to say the least. They lost Drew Holiday, Al Horford, Luke Cornett, and Kristaps Porzingis. They added Anthony Simons, Chris Boucher, who I like, Luka Garza, who I actually like too, just in a smaller role than he'd be in this year. And then some interesting young talent. Josh Minott from Minnesota, really good athlete. Hugo Gonzalez, a player they drafted at the end of the first round. RJ Louise out of St. John's. A bunch of other young guys they'll take a look at camp. Kind of an interesting looking depth chart, right? Like they obviously an insanely weak center rotation. Like Xavier Tillman, Neemias Queta, Luka Garza. I think we'll probably see some Boucher at center this year. That's obviously just not even close to good enough to compete at the later rounds of the NBA playoffs, right? But there's some strong perimeter talent there. Jaylen Brown is still a top 25 player in the NBA at minimum. Derrick White is one of the best two-way guards in the league. Sam Hauser is a solid defender and an excellent three-point shooter. Anthony Simons is at least interesting and represents a type of player we haven't seen on this version of the Celtics. Excuse me. And he's a guy we're going to talk quite a bit about here in a minute. And then an assortment of young talent that we should get a really good look at this year under the circumstances. Like I want to see a lot of Hugo Gonzalez. I want to see a lot of Baylor Shireman. And we should get to see that this year under the circumstances. The first question is, should Jason Tatum attempt a return this year? There's been a lot of buzz surrounding this idea. And I do understand where the idea comes from. Like Tatum's a competitor who loves basketball. Of course he's sitting on his couch like, I'm coming back this year. Like I totally get that. And then the East appears to be wide open. So I'm sure Tatum looks at things and goes, maybe we can jump in here and get the job done. But this is obviously a foolish idea. It's just risky to bring him back from an Achilles tear during the highest leverage in most intense and most physical games of the season. And also have some self-awareness. This is not a championship roster anymore. That front court rotation is just not good enough to win 4 playoff rounds. So keep Tatum out. Embrace this season as a learning opportunity. Bring him back next year with a reinforced roster and a body that is actually physically ready for the grind. So what exactly is the learning opportunity? The Jaylen Brown piece is pretty self-explanatory. Let's see what he looks like when he's the consistent top of the scouting report shot creator. Let's see how he can perform. Remember, we talked about this concept a lot, the difference in roles. I'm getting these shots every game and these opportunities, and I'm really just concerned with like 25 to 30 of my team's field goal attempts every game. To, I am now one of the lead initiators of the team, and more than half of the shots we get are either going to be shot by me, directly assisted by me, or created by an advantage that I created at the beginning of a possession that got driven and kicked a few times, whatever it might be, right? That job is very different. The I need to create 50 to 60 shots tonight is a very different job than I need to create 25 shots tonight. And that's the type of role that Jaylen's going to be shifting closer towards. We know what he's capable of. Game 5 last year against New York. 26 points, 8 rebounds, 12 assists, just 2 turnovers. Wonderful game management throughout. If you remember, we covered it at the time, like using the post as a vehicle with which to get the defense in rotation, taking easy reads that were available to him, not really forcing the issue. If I remember correctly, he didn't really take a pull-up jump shot in that game for a little while. He just eased his way in, upped his aggression at various points. Wonderful game management, right? Game 6, not so much. Although cut him some slack. That was a buzzsaw of a closeout game in Madison Square Garden. But he goes for 26-6 with 7 turnovers. He was minus 30 in 32 minutes. This year will be a large sample test of his shot creation. Is it going to be closer to game 5 or closer to game 6? That's going to be part of the learning experience with Jaylen Brown this year. The next piece is Anthony Simons. And what I find fascinating here is we haven't really seen this type of guard in Joe Mazzulla's system before. A really dynamic guard with some downhill burst. He's not like the most athletic downhill guy in the league, but he can beat people off the dribble. And he's a solid pull-up shooter, like over, I think he was like 1.01 points per possession. This could be a super interesting fit in Boston's system. For starters, in drive and kick, he's a knockdown open catch and shoot shooter. He hit 44% of his unguarded catch and shoot threes last year. So in theory, The open shots that get generated in the drive and kick system, he can knock them down. He was also a good high volume pick and roll player last year. He ran 931 pick and rolls last year. It's a huge volume. And he got 1.04 points per possession, including passes, which is good. And when you really dig into it, like Portland was not a good play finishing team last year. They were 26th in spot up efficiency and 15th in roll man efficiency. And he still got 1.04 points per possession, in large part because he's a very good scorer out of ball screens. He was top 10 in efficiency shooting out of pick and roll among players who logged at least 400 possessions of that type last year. He's a good pull-up shooter, shot 35% on pull-up threes, 47% from the mid-range, 40% from floater range. Nothing like insanely impressive, but good. And overall, as a pick and roll player, one of the better ones in the league if you really look at it juxtaposed with the talent that he was playing with. So this season will be an excellent case study. When you're looking at big picture roster construction for the Celtics, you had this championship level roster and you just completely blew it up for good reason. Brad Stevens in his media day presser talked about the need to get out from the second apron, the idea that they wouldn't have been able to make a trade for a Drew Holiday or for a Kristaps Porzingis like they did 2 summers ago if they were in the second apron. If they were in the second apron, excuse me. So you blew it up. You did what you had to do. But the next goal is we still have Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum locked up long term. We need to put together a championship roster. How do we do so? It may not look the same as it did in 2024, right? So you might have to consider a different type of player. What if the type of player that becomes available is a high usage on ball pick and roll guard, right? This is a good case study. Maybe it is Anthony Simons, and maybe it ends up being a wonderful partnership, and he ends up being a partner with Tatum and Brown moving forward. Or maybe it's this is a kind of a proof of concept that this can work. We'll move on from Anthony and we'll look for this type of dude in the draft, or we'll look for this type of dude around the league when the opportunity provides itself. So like, is Anthony Simons going to thrive in Joe Mazzulla's system? That would be a good sign for the future. And I'm very, very excited to see that. And again, because you're not necessarily competing for a championship this year, you get to have a good extended look at your young players. See which ones make sense to actually factor into your big picture plans. Will definitely be a different type of year for Celtics fans. Not going to be rooting for one of the most supremely talented teams in the NBA, but they are super interesting. And they should be fun to watch and root for different reasons.